It all started on a cold, gray morning at a U.S. military base overseas. The kind of morning where the sky looks heavy enough to touch, and every breath turns into mist. The base was quiet, calm, almost too ordinary. Soldiers went about their routines, morning drills, equipment checks, and a few half-hearted jokes over lukewarm coffee. No one expected the day to be any different. But then the sound came, a deep, rhythmic thumping in the distance. The unmistakable whup-whup-whup of helicopter blades cutting through the freezing air. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. "What's that? Supply drop?" One private asked. "Not today," another replied, squinting toward the horizon. "That's no cargo chopper." As the dark silhouette grew larger, soldiers stepped out from tents and barracks, shading their eyes. The chopper's outline wasn't standard issue. It was sleeker, larger, more like something you'd see on the news. When it finally descended, kicking up a storm of dust and grit, the base went dead silent. Everyone stared, shielding their faces as the wind whipped across the compound. Then the side door opened. Out stepped a familiar figure. A tall man in a long black overcoat, wearing a crisp red tie that somehow didn't move, even in the gusts of the rotors. The moment he raised his hand to wave, the murmurs began. "Wait, is that? No way. Is that him?" It was Donald J. Trump, former president of the United States, standing right there on the tarmac with no press entourage, no stage, no podium. Just him, a few aides, and a handful of security personnel who looked like they'd been planning this for weeks in secret. The soldiers straightened instinctively, unsure if they should salute or just stare. Trump looked around, smiling in that familiar half-smirk way of his, and said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Well, I hope I'm not interrupting lunch." Laughter broke the tension. Some of the soldiers clapped, others just looked at each other, still processing the moment. Trump shook a few hands as he walked past, patting shoulders and asking names. "You doing good? How's morale out here?" he asked one young Marine, who looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. "Doing fine, sir," the Marine replied, trying to keep a straight face. Trump nodded. "That's what I like to hear. Strong people. The best people." Finally, he made his way to the mess tent, or what passed for one. Inside were rows of folding tables, metal trays, and boxes stacked with those famous brown pouches every soldier knows too well. MREs, meals, ready to eat. The moment Trump saw them, his expression changed, part curiosity, part suspicion. He picked up a pouch and turned it over like he was examining a stock certificate. "So this is it?" he asked, holding it up. "The famous MRE?" A few soldiers nearby grinned. One of them, a tall sergeant with mud on his boots, chuckled and said, "You sure you want to eat that, sir?" Trump looked at him, pretending to think it over. "If you guys can handle it every day, I think I can too. Let's see what all the hype is about." That made everyone laugh. You could feel the tension in the room melt away as soldiers pulled out their phones, ready to capture the moment. One private whispered, "No way he's actually gonna eat it. Bet he doesn't even open it." Another whispered back. But Trump was serious, or at least determined. He found a chair at one of the tables, sat down, and began inspecting the MRE like a scientist. "Okay, so, what's this? Beef chili with beans?" he said, reading the label. "Sounds promising. I like chili. Beans not so much, but we'll see." He held up the little heating packet that came with it and squinted. "You mean this thing cooks it?" "Yes, sir," a soldier explained. "Just add water. It heats itself up." Trump laughed. "So you're telling me this is like a Trump Tower meal? No stove, no chef, just science." The soldiers burst out laughing again. He was clearly out of his element, but he was taking it in stride. He carefully followed the instructions, pouring in water, watching as the packet started to puff up with heat and steam. "Look at that," he said. "This thing's smoking more than CNN after election night." The room erupted. Even the quiet ones couldn't hold back their laughter. When the chili was finally ready, Trump looked down at it. The thick, reddish-brown mixture that didn't exactly scream gourmet. He hesitated, spoon in hand, and said, "All right, if I disappear after this, tell Melania I went out brave." Another wave of laughter filled the tent. He scooped up a bite, studied it, and slowly brought it to his mouth as the soldiers leaned in, phones recording. The moment the spoon touched his lips, his face changed. His eyebrows raised, his jaw paused mid-chew. He swallowed, set the spoon down, and said with mock seriousness, "You know what? I've had worse." The room went wild, clapping, cheering, laughing. One soldier yelled, "That's the spirit, sir." Trump nodded, smiling, and said, "You guys are tougher than anyone I know. If this is what keeps America's military going, you all deserve a medal just for eating it." And just like that, the ice was broken. What started as a quiet, cold morning turned into one of the most unforgettable lunches the base had ever seen. Now, if you've never had an MRE, imagine a meal that's designed to survive anything. Can handle heat, cold, time, even war zones. Is built to last, not to taste good. The label says, "Meal, ready to eat." But every soldier jokes it really stands for meals rejected by everyone. Trump picked one up, turning the brown plastic pouch over in his hands. "So this is the famous MRE," he said, almost suspiciously. "Looks like a secret government experiment." The troops chuckled. One young private shouted, "It's not bad, sir, if you hold your nose." Another added, "You'll survive it, but you might question your life choices halfway through." Trump smirked. "You're not selling it, fellas." He tore open the pouch carefully, like someone unwrapping a rare artifact. Inside was the classic beef chili with beans, along with the usual extras: a packet of crackers, a blob of peanut butter, a tiny bottle of hot sauce, and a dessert bar so dense it could double as building material. Trump laid the items out in a neat line, studying them like a crime scene investigator. "This," he said slowly, pointing at the dessert bar, "looks like something I'd find behind the couch in Trump Tower. Been there since 1989. The soldiers burst out laughing. Someone in the back shouted, "Wait till you taste it." But before the laughter could fade, Trump grew thoughtful. He looked at the pouch again, then at the soldiers standing around, still smiling despite the biting wind and endless days away from home. "You guys eat this every day?" he asked, his tone quieter now. A Marine nearby nodded. "Yes, sir. Sometimes 3 times a day if supplies are tight. It's not a 5-star meal, but it keeps you going." Trump raised his eyebrows, genuinely impressed. 3 times a day? You must have the strongest stomachs in America." The Marine chuckled. "You get used to it after a while, sir." Trump gave a half grin, half sigh. "All right then," he said. "Let's give it a try." He opened the little flameless heater bag, poured in the water, and watched it start to hiss and expand. "It's alive," he joked, holding it up as steam began to pour out. "This thing's cooking itself. I love it. It's like a deal that makes its own money." The soldiers cracked up again, filming the moment on their phones. A few shouted words of encouragement like a crowd at a Daredevil show. "You got this, sir. Don't back out now." Trump looked at them and grinned. "You think I'm afraid of a little chili? I face tougher crowds, like CNN." That one got the loudest laugh yet. Even the commander standing in the back couldn't hide his smile. A few minutes later, the MRE was ready. Trump peeled the pouch open, releasing a puff of steam that carried a smell somewhere between canned soup and regret. He leaned forward and sniffed it cautiously. "Okay, I'm not gonna lie," he said, wrinkling his nose. "This smells like a negotiation gone wrong." The troops were nearly crying from laughter now. Cameras were up everywhere. Finally, Trump picked up the little plastic spoon, gave the chili a stir, and scooped up his first bite. The entire tent went silent. Even the heaters in the corner seemed to pause. He took a slow, deliberate bite, chewed, stared into space for a long moment. Then, with a perfectly straight face, he said, "This tastes like something my chef would get arrested for serving me." The room exploded. Laughter bounced off the metal walls. Soldiers doubled over, some clapping, others recording, shouting things like, "He said it!" and "That's the review of the year." Trump sat back, pretending to think seriously about the flavor. "It's got a little spice," he said. "A little texture and absolutely no business being called food." Someone called out, "Would you eat it again, sir?" He grinned. "Only if it's the last meal on Earth, and even then I'd think twice." The laughter just wouldn't stop. Even the stern-faced officer in charge had tears in his eyes from laughing so hard. But amid all the jokes, Trump paused again, looking around at the men and women in uniform. Faces lit by laughter, some tired, some young, some clearly missing home. "You know," he said finally, "I joke about the food, but the truth is, this little pouch keeps you all going. It's not about the taste. It's about the mission, about getting through another day, staying strong." The laughter softened into smiles. The tent fell quiet again, not awkwardly, but in a way that felt full of respect. Trump nodded slowly. "You're tougher than anyone out there realizes. You eat this, sleep on dirt, work through the cold, and you still laugh. That's what makes America strong." There was a brief silence before someone yelled out, "So what's the final review, Mr. President?" He looked at the chili, then at the camera and said, "Let's just say this. It's not going on the Mar-a-Lago menu anytime soon." And just like that, the tent erupted once more. Laughter, applause, and the sound of a moment that none of them would ever forget. After the laughter finally began to fade, something unexpected happened. The tent, which moments ago echoed with jokes and roaring laughter, fell into a comfortable, almost reverent quiet. You could still hear a few chuckles here and there, but the energy had shifted. Trump set the little plastic spoon down, the MRE pouch half-eaten in front of him, and leaned back slightly. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just looked around at the rows of faces staring back. Soldiers in dusty uniforms, sleeves rolled up, boots caked in dirt, smiles that looked genuine but carried the weight of sleepless nights. Some looked barely older than kids. Others had eyes that told a lifetime of stories. "You know," Trump began softly, almost to himself, "I joke about the food, but I don't joke about what you do." The words cut through the air like a quiet drumbeat. He continued, his voice slower now, no longer the booming showman tone the world was used to. "You guys eat this," he said, tapping the MRE pouch. "Sleep in rough places, wake up to sounds that most people couldn't handle. You miss your families, your kids, your homes, and you still find a reason to smile. That's what real strength looks like." For a long second, no one moved. Even the wind outside seemed to calm down. The soldiers just watched him, surprised at the sudden shift in tone. Then, from the far end of the room, one soldier, young, maybe in his mid-20s, with dirt still on his face from morning duty, spoke up. "Sir," he said respectfully, "we appreciate you being here. Most people don't see what it's really like out here. They see the medals, the photos, but not the rest of it." Trump nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I know," he said, "and you know what? That's something I'll never take for granted again." He looked down at the brown pouch in front of him, picked it up, and turned it over in his hand. The material crackled softly. "I may not be eating MREs again anytime soon," he said with a half-smile, "but I'll never forget that this little pouch keeps America running." He paused, holding it up for everyone to see. "It feeds heroes." That sentence landed like a spark. A few soldiers started to clap. Slowly at first, then louder, the sound of gloves hitting palms echoing through the tent. A Marine near the back stood a little taller and shouted proudly, "Semper Fi!" The whole room erupted again. This time, not in laughter, but in pure, raw emotion. A few wiped their eyes discreetly. Others exchanged nods, small gestures that said more than words ever could. Trump smiled and pointed toward the Marine. "That's the spirit," he said warmly. "I love that. That's what America's made of. People who don't quit, who don't complain, who just get it done." He turned to another group sitting near the heater. "How long have you all been out here?" 8 months, sir," one of them replied. "Rotating soon, if we're lucky." Trump nodded again. 8 months. Away from family, away from home, eating this gourmet masterpiece. He joked, lifting the spoon again. You deserve more than a medal for that. The soldiers laughed softly, but this time it wasn't the kind of laughter that came from a punchline. It came from appreciation, from being seen, acknowledged, humanized. Trump's tone shifted again, growing thoughtful. You know, he said, back home people talk about sacrifice, but they don't really understand it. They think it's about politics, about big speeches. But it's not. It's about this. He gestured around the room, at the cots, the helmets hanging by the door, the faint hum of the generator. It's about people like you. Ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things. No one interrupted. Even the press team that had followed him in kept their cameras low, almost respectfully. Trump looked at the MRE again, as if trying to find the right words. This isn't a fancy meal, he said, but it represents something bigger: endurance, teamwork, survival. You guys make the best out of the worst situations. You laugh when things are tough. You carry the weight so others don't have to. That's real leadership. That's real courage. The room stayed quiet, except for the occasional crackle of the heater. Then one soldier spoke up from near the entrance. His voice steady but filled with emotion. Sir, he said, thank you for saying that. Sometimes, we forget people back home even though we're still out here. Trump looked directly at him. We do, he said simply. And we're proud of you. Every single one of you. Another wave of clapping rolled through the room. Trump smiled, stood up, and shook a few more hands. All right, he said, trying to lighten the mood again. Before I start tearing up, somebody get me another one of these MRE desserts. I think I earned it. That broke the tension instantly. Laughter returned, bouncing around the tent like old friends. Someone tossed him a brownie pack, and Trump caught it clumsily, holding it up like a trophy. Ladies and gentlemen, he declared with a grin, the finest cuisine the U.S. military has to offer. Everyone cheered, not because of the dessert, but because in that moment they felt connected. The jokes, the warmth, the honesty, it wasn't a speech. It was real. And as they laughed together once more, that mix of humor and heart filled the room. A reminder that sometimes, the smallest gestures leave the biggest impact. Then came dessert, a tiny vacuum-sealed square that looked more like a spare tire patch than something edible. It was the infamous MRE brownie, the kind of treat every soldier had a love-hate relationship with. Trump squinted at it, holding it between his thumb and forefinger like it might start ticking. This is dessert? He asked, pretending to study it from every angle. Looks like it's been through World War III. Twice. That did it. The tent erupted. The soldiers laughed so hard a few nearly dropped their trays. Even the military chef, a tall man who had been quietly watching from the back, doubled over, wiping tears from his eyes. One soldier shouted through the laughter, "It's better if you don't look at it, sir." Another called out, "Close your eyes and imagine chocolate cake." Trump grinned, enjoying every second of it. All right, he said, waving his hand dramatically. You guys are talking this thing up like it's a 5-star dessert. Let's see if it lives up to the hype." He peeled back the wrapper, the plastic making that loud crunch sound only MREs make. The brownie emerged, perfectly square, slightly shiny, and harder than it had any right to be. He gave it a little sniff. "Smells like determination," he joked. The soldiers howled. Phones were up everywhere, recording the moment. Even the base commander, normally serious as stone, was shaking his head, smiling. Trump looked straight into one of the cameras, holding the brownie close. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to make history," he said with mock solemnity. "If I don't make it out of this, tell the American people I did it for them." The crowd lost it again. Someone in the back yelled, "For America!" and the tent filled with cheers and laughter. He took a bite, a big one because of course he did, and chewed slowly. His expression didn't change, just blank. Everyone leaned in, waiting. Finally, after what felt like forever, he said with a dramatic pause, "You know what?" He swallowed, tapped the brownie with his spoon, and added, "This actually isn't bad. Maybe I'll order a few cases for Mar-a-Lago." The soldiers roared. Some clapped, some whistled, Others banged their spoons against the table. One Marine shouted, "We'll send you a year's supply, Mr. President." Trump laughed so hard he nearly dropped the brownie. "Deal," he said, "but only if you promise to autograph the boxes for me." That broke the last bit of stiffness left in the room. Every wall between leader and troops just disappeared. It wasn't a politician talking to soldiers anymore. It was just people sharing a rare human moment. Trump wiped his hands, leaned forward on the table, and started asking questions. Real ones. "So where's everyone from?" he asked. "How long have you been stationed here? What's the hardest part of the job?" And suddenly, the tent turned into a conversation circle. One soldier from Texas talked about missing his daughter's birthday but promised to bring her a souvenir from overseas. Another, a young woman from Ohio, said she'd been counting the days until her wedding back home. Trump listened closely, nodding, occasionally cracking a joke. "Don't worry," he told one soldier. "The first thing I'm doing when I get back is sending the Pentagon better recipes." The laughter came again, but it was softer now, mixed with warmth, gratitude, and that rare sense of connection that happens only when people truly see each other. One soldier said, "Sir, it means a lot you took the time to eat this stuff with us." Trump smiled. "If I can survive this meal," he said, patting the MRE pouch, "I can survive anything, but you guys do this every day. That's something to be proud of." For a brief moment, the cameras, the press aides, the distant hum of the helicopter, all of it disappeared. The world outside didn't exist. It was just laughter, conversation, and the clatter of plastic spoons on metal tables. It didn't matter that the food tasted like cardboard or that everyone was bone-tired. What mattered was that, for one meal, they weren't soldiers and a president. They were people sharing stories, memories, and a little bit of chocolate-flavored resilience. One young Marine summed it up perfectly. He raised his brownie and said, "Here's to bad food and good company." Trump lifted his own piece in return. "I'll toast to that," he said with a grin. The tent filled with cheers once more. Someone started clapping in rhythm, and before long, the whole room joined in. Not out of protocol, not for politics, but because it felt right. Later, when Trump finally stood to leave, he looked around the room and said, "You know, this might be the first meal I'll never forget, and not because of the taste." The soldiers laughed again, but this time the laughter carried something deeper. Respect, gratitude, and a shared understanding that moments like these don't happen often. And as he stepped out into the fading light of the base, the echoes of that laughter followed him, proof that sometimes, even the simplest meal can feed the heart more than the stomach. As the visit drew to an end, the energy in the tent shifted once again. The laughter had softened into smiles, and the cameras had been lowered. Soldiers began to rise from their seats, still chatting, still grinning. As Trump stood up and brushed a few crumbs off his coat, he looked around the room. Rows of uniforms, weary faces, proud postures, and said with a genuine warmth in his voice, "You've all made this one of the best lunches I've ever had, even if it was also the worst tasting." That line got another round of laughter. He moved from table to table, shaking hands, giving a few pats on the shoulder, stopping for photos. One Marine, young and visibly exhausted but still smiling, reached out and said, "Sir, thanks for sitting with us." Not everyone would. Trump paused. He gripped the Marine's hand a little tighter and looked him straight in the eye. "You guys do the hard stuff," he said. "The least I can do is share lunch with you, even if it's the worst lunch I've ever had." The Marine laughed, shaking his head. "Fair enough, sir. Fair." Trump said, raising an eyebrow. "I'd call it brave." The laughter came again, but now it was softer. Not from comedy, but from connection. You could feel the pride ripple through the room. The soldiers weren't just meeting a former president. They were being seen, really seen, as people, not just uniforms. Before leaving, Trump noticed a stack of untouched MRE pouches on one of the tables. He picked one up, uncapped a pen, and scrawled his signature across it. "Now this," he said, holding it up, "is officially a collector's item." The soldiers burst out laughing and immediately started handing him more pouches. "Sir, Can you sign mine too? One for my wife. My kid's not gonna believe this. Within minutes, those dull brown MRE packets, the same ones they joked about all day, had turned into prized souvenirs covered in bold looping signatures. One soldier even asked him to sign the dessert bar wrapper. Trump looked at it, laughed, and said, "The brownie deserves recognition for bravery too." Even the base commander joined in, thanking him for taking the time to visit. "You brought a lot of smiles today, sir," he said. Trump nodded. "They deserve it. Every one of them." Outside, the light had started to fade. The gray sky was streaked with orange and pink as the sun slipped lower. The cold air bit at their faces as Trump walked toward the waiting helicopter. The soldiers followed him out, lining the path, still waving, still smiling. A sudden gust of wind whipped across the landing zone, catching Trump's famous red tie and sending it flapping wildly in the air. The soldiers laughed and shouted playful goodbyes. Then one voice rose above the rest. A young soldier near the back of the line yelled, "Don't forget your dessert, sir." Everyone turned to see him waving the leftover brownie high in the air. Trump turned back, laughing so hard he nearly lost his balance. He raised a thumbs up and shouted over the roar of the blades, "Keep it! You need it more than I do." That one line set off another wave of laughter and cheers. He climbed aboard, ducking under the spinning rotors. The chopper's engines thundered louder, filling the air with dust and sound. Soldiers raised their hands to shield their faces, but they kept waving, not out of formality, but out of genuine gratitude. As the helicopter lifted off the ground, its blades whipping up a storm of sand and wind, the soldiers stood firm. Some saluting, others just smiling, their eyes following it as it rose higher and higher into the gray-orange sky. When the sound finally began to fade, and the helicopter disappeared over the horizon, the base fell quiet again. Only the soft rustling of uniforms and the low hum of the generators remained. Then one of the younger soldiers broke the silence. "Did that really just happen?" he said, still holding his signed MRE pouch. "Yeah," another replied, staring at his own autographed brownie wrapper. "And I'm never eating this thing now." The group laughed. That easy, tired kind of laughter that only comes after something special. As they filed back into the tent, still talking about every detail, the jokes, the chili, the look on Trump's face when he took the first bite, something lingered in the air. It wasn't just the memory of a famous man's visit. It was the feeling that, for a brief afternoon, they hadn't been forgotten. Because in that room, filled with cheap plastic spoons, half-eaten MREs, and soldiers far from home, something rare had happened. A moment of connection that went beyond politics, beyond status, beyond headlines. It wasn't about the food or the cameras or even the jokes. It was about respect. About laughter in a place where laughter was rare. About feeling seen. And maybe, just maybe, that's why, long after the helicopter was gone, long after the noise faded into the distance, a few of those soldiers sat quietly at their tables, smiling to themselves. Because for one afternoon, they didn't just serve their country. They were reminded why they did. And in that small tent, filled with bad chili, hard brownies, and honest laughter, there were both tears and pride, mixed perfectly into a story they'd tell for years.